Yeah. So what we were discussing before, in the previous lecture, is that we just started the idea of frequency response. We said frequency response is a very important characteristic of an amplifier. An engineer should have a knowledge of the frequency response so that the engineer can know what is the range of what kind of signals he can feed to the amplifier. If he wants to amplify audio signals, then it needs to have a certain frequency response. If he wants to amplify video signal, then it should have gain constant for a larger range of frequency because video signals are high frequency signals. So, and sometimes we said we can also tailor or tweak the frequency response if we, based on what is the frequency range we need this amplifier to operate. So typically in radio frequency circuits, we normally do that. We ensure that we get a gain over a narrow range of frequencies. So we said it's very important to know the frequency response. So now in this lecture, we will see how to plot frequency response and how do we go about generally analyzing a MOS amplifier circuit. And we will also see what causes the frequency response. We very briefly discussed the parasitic capacitors will have frequency dependent impedances. Because the impedances are frequency dependent, the gains will also tend to be frequency dependent. And we said that other reason, we said we were talking about the idea of a transfer function. We said you take any system, an amplifier can be a simple system. The first thing we do is try to compute the transfer function of that system. And we said we resorted, we would try to compute the Laplace transform of the impulse response and call it as the transfer function. And from the knowledge of the transfer function, we can say two important things. We can say if the system is stable, that's the first thing you can say by just looking at the transfer function h of s. The second thing, if you evaluate the transfer function h of s at s equal to j omega, we get the frequency response as well. So our goal is either to find the transfer function of a system, or if given I need a certain kind of transfer function, then how do we get the transfer function using a circuit? So these are the two problems that we will be trying to discuss in the remaining lectures. And we also gave an intuitive reasoning. Why do we go for, the whole idea of going for transfer functions and all that is that we were trying to apply Laplace transforms and trying to derive transfer functions. So we said, why do we go for, what was the motivation behind going for Laplace transforms is that most amplifier models that we will be analyzing, we will be adopting linear models, linear small signal models to analyze them. If you want to try to find the gain of an amplifier at a certain frequency, we are going to assume a linearized model of the amplifier around some bias point and then compute the gain at that frequency. Okay, so eventually what we are going to do is we are going to derive a linear model which will comprise of dependent sources, resistors, capacitors, and so on. So if I have a circuit that is composed of linear circuit elements, resistors, capacitors, dependent sources, and all of that, then you can call it as an LTA system. So then that will invariably be an LTA system, linear time invariant system. Okay, and for linear time invariant systems, most linear time invariant systems can be expressed in this format. So I very briefly discussed last time, but yeah, I'm just going to quickly repeat it. So most linear differential equations, systems that can be characterized by linear differential equations, can be written in this general form. So let me just probably show you an example where we will actually get where we will get a system like this. So let me just take a small example. I'll analyze a common source amplifier with previously we were analyzing with a load resistor. Now I'm going to add a capacitor here and try to find out a relationship between voltage V0 and Vi. If let's assume capacitance CL is 0, which means there is no capacitance. If there is no capacitance, what will be the relationship between V0? Ignore R0. Let's assume R0 is infinity, lambda is 0. What's the relationship between V0 and Vi? It's a common source amplifier, right? So it will be minus of Gm times RL into Vi. This will be the expression for the output and input voltages. Now, if I have a capacitor then you will have to solve it. So first I'm going to solve without, right now I'm going to assume I'll not be using Laplace transforms. So we'll just solve it the brute force way, write Kirchhoff's current law at this node. So you will get CL dV naught by dt plus V naught by R. That's your current entering, I'm applying Kirchhoff's current law at this node. What is the current through the MOSFET? Can I say that will be Gm times Vi? Okay, that will be just Gm times Vi. So this current plus Gm times Vi should be equal to 0 because all the currents are leaving at this node. All the currents are leaving at this node, so I'm equating this to 0. So this, I can take R to the numerator, I can take R common out. So I'll get C R L CL dV naught by dt plus V naught equals minus of Gm R into Vi. So now if you see, previously it was just a linear equation. In the presence of a capacitor, we are getting an additional derivative term as well. Okay, in the steady state, let's assume you are applying an input which is going to remain constant in the steady state. Okay, if the input is going to remain constant in the steady state, you can expect output also to remain constant in the steady state. For most stable systems, that will hold true. So in that case, what will happen in the steady state? What will happen to dV naught by dt? The steady state? 0, right? Because I'm assuming input is constant, which means it's not going to change. So dvi by dt is 0 in the steady state. And since I'm applying an input which is constant to a linear time invariant system, output should also become more or less constant in the steady state. So dV naught by dt will also be 0 in the steady state. So in the steady state, it approaches this. V naught equals minus GMR times Vi. It approaches this equation without a capacitor. Okay, so that's like capacitor is now an open circuit in the steady state and all of that. So it approaches this equation in the steady state. So in the steady state, you will get that full gain of the system. So that's what this equation is telling us. More importantly, what I'm trying to tell you is that if I introduce a capacitor in the system, then an amplifier which was purely a linear system before without any derivative terms, now will end up having some derivative terms as well. So if I can generalize this, any nth order system can, what I'm trying to say is that any amplifier can be generalized and represented as an nth order linear differential equation. Okay, it can be represented as an nth order linear differential equation. And if you want to find a solution for this equation, then you'll have to solve this differential equation. So that's where Laplace transform comes in very handy. We know that if you apply Laplace transforms to linear differential equations can be converted to, so that's what I've shown here. Let's assume this is an nth order linear differential equation. So you have a power a n d nth derivative of y, n minus 1th derivative of y, and so on till y itself. That should be equal to some mth derivatives of x. I mean, it can be just proportional to x itself, or it can also depend on some derivatives of x. So that's what this equation tells us. Now, to solve this equation in time domain might be a bit more complicated. As a procedure, it might be a bit more complicated. That's where Laplace transform comes in very handy. If I take Laplace transform on both the sides, linear differential equations can simply be reduced to polynomial equations, algebraic equations. And we have a rich literature of how to solve these algebraic equations. So that can be very easily used in analyzing systems now. So that's the power of Laplace transforms. It will help in reducing it helps in solving differential equations in a very simple manner. Yeah. So how do we compute the transfer function for any system? If you know the linear differential equation which is characterizing the system. Okay, so I'll just answer that. So one of you're asking, how did I assume dVA by dt is 0? See, what I meant is, let's assume you have applied a step input to the system. If you apply a step input to the system, the input in the steady state is constant. Only at origin it is changing. In the steady state, it's constant, right? Since the input is constant in the steady state, dVA by dt is 0. That's what I meant by this. The change in the input is constant. So for most inputs, if I can make an assumption this way. For sinusoidal inputs, I can't do that, but I just gave you an example how you approach this equation in the steady state. That's it. Yeah. So I'll come back to this. If I take Laplace transform on both the sides, I'm going to take Laplace transform on both the sides of this differential equation. When we do that, what we are going to get, we'll use this very simple result that if you take a function x of t, whose Laplace transform is x of s, the derivative of x of t, x dot of t, will have an for a Laplace transform of s into x of s. Similarly, if I take a function which is n times differentiated, x nth derivative of t, x nth derivative of t, the Laplace transform of this will be s power n times x of s. Okay, so this is generally, it holds true, and you will have some additional terms as well. But generally, if your x of s is 0 for 0, s equal to 0, this result holds true. This is fine for us. So I'm going to use this condition on both the sides. Then if I take Laplace transform on the numerator, I'm going to get a term like this: a n s power n plus a n minus 1 s power n minus 1, so on till a naught into y of s. This will be equal to b m s power m, because this is mth derivative. I've assumed this is an mth order differential equation, s power m, so on till b naught into x of s. Now the ratio of output by input, y of s by x of s, is what we call transfer function. Now it's very important for us to know the transfer function of a system, because we just discussed a few moments ago. If you know the transfer function h of s completely, then you know everything that you need to know about the system. For a linear time invariant system, a transfer function contains every information that you need to know about the system. You can say if the system is stable or not. If you apply a bounded input, you should expect a bounded output. You should not expect growing outputs. You should not expect sinusoidal outputs, some oscillatory outputs. If you give a bounded input, output should also be bounded. So that you can say by looking at the transfer function, whether the system will be able to give that or not. The second thing that you will be able to say is the frequency response. So if you take the transfer function and evaluate it at s equal to j omega, then I get the frequency response. And we said in the previous lecture, we spoke in great detail about how to measure, at least in reasonable detail, about how to measure the frequency response. We said we will feed sinusoids and then, and change the frequency of the sinusoid and see how does the amplitude of the sine wave change as a function of frequency. Okay, amplitude at the output of your system change as a function of frequency. So that gives me an information about the frequency response of the system. Now, if you found the transfer function, from the transfer function directly you get all that information if you just evaluate it mathematically at s equal to j omega. So that's the power and advantage of a transfer function. Everything you need to know about the system. How will the system, whether the system is stable or not, or how will the system behave for any given input, that information is contained in frequency response. Okay, so that can be obtained from the knowledge of transfer function. Okay, so that's the first thing. So now what to do? Okay, now I know transfer function. How do I say if a system is stable or not? So that we discussed very briefly that as well. If I know the transfer function h of s, for any linear differential equation system, the transfer function can be expressed. Any system that can be characterized by a linear differential equation can be expressed as a ratio of a numerator polynomial in s divided by a denominator polynomial in s. Okay, since we have two polynomials in s in both the numerator and denominator, so if I have an nth order polynomial, the roots of the polynomial will tell me everything I need to know about the polynomial. The roots contain all that information about the polynomial. Okay, if I give you the roots, you will be able to construct the polynomial itself. So right now, the power of Laplace transform is that you will be just looking at the roots of the numerator and denominator polynomial, and then based on those roots, you will be able to say if a system is stable or not. So these roots of this numerator polynomial, so wherein your n of s goes to 0, so the values of s, when I say roots of n of s, the values of s for which n of s goes to 0, which means h of s also goes to 0. If n of s goes to 0, h of s also goes to 0. So the condition here is that d of s is not going to 0 at the same point. Okay, so this is the condition. But to generalize, I might simply not talk in terms of NFS and DFS and simply say, if h of s becomes equal to 0, then the roots of h of s which satisfy this condition are called zeros. They are called the zeros of the transfer function. Similarly, if h of s blows up to infinity for some values of x, meaning your denominator polynomial is going to 0 at that point. So these are the roots of the denominator polynomial. So the roots of the denominator polynomial are the points where your transfer function blows up to infinity. So those values are called poles. The thing about Laplace transform is that by looking at these poles and zeros, we can directly say if a system is stable or not. So what is the condition for stability? Since most of you have done basic course on signals and systems, what is the condition for stability? If you have poles and zeros, you know the poles and zeros of a system, then all the poles, so this is an open loop system, okay? I'm talking about an open loop system. So for an open loop system to be stable, all the poles has to be in the left of S plane. You cannot have any pole in the right of S plane, or you cannot have them on the j omega axis as well. Okay, in analog circuit design, we said, even though in control systems, you said this is a marginally stable system. In analog and RF systems, we generally consider not only poles in the right of plane, but also poles on the j omega axis. Even that is considered unstable because this will produce steady state oscillations. Both these conditions are, the system has to satisfy this condition of all the poles being in the left of S plane. If the poles are on the j omega axis or on the right of S plane, then the system is unstable. So that's it. So the first thing you will do, if you're given an amplifier, first if you compute the transfer function of the amplifier, from that knowledge, you can directly say if this amplifier is stable or not by just finding out the poles and zeros. And we said there is no such condition on zeros. Zeros can be on the right of plane as well. The zeros can exist in the right of plane. For this is an open loop system, so it doesn't matter. Zeros can exist even in the right of plane. Still, the system will be stable. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Zeros don't determine the stability of a system. They usually determine how, sometimes if you want to, I'll probably talk about zeros a little bit later. What impact does zeros have on the system? Okay, so we'll discuss it a little later. They generally have a tendency to improve the transient response. They'll generally improve the initial response of a system. Okay, in the steady state, zeros really won't have any impact. So let's assume if I'm applying a fixed input. Okay, if I'm applying a fixed input, which is going to be steady, it's going to be constant in the steady state, where dx by dt is 0. Okay, then do you think zeros will have any impact on the system? What exactly is a zero? So let me pose the simple question. Let me write a differential equation and ask you a simpler question this way. dy by dt tau plus y equals some a dx by dt plus x. So does this system contain a zero? If this system contains a zero, what is the zero of the system? Can you tell me what is the zero of the system? Is it minus a? Is that okay? The zero of the system is actually minus a. So it's a left of plane zero. But now look at this. Zero is coming because in the system, because the output depends on derivatives of the input. Only when your output depends on derivatives of the input, you will end up getting zeros in the system. Okay, the output should depend on some kind of derivatives of the input. In the steady state, if your input is nearly constant, if your input is not changing, then this term will go to 0. Okay, this term will go to 0. So zeros will not really have any impact on the steady state behavior of a system. So steady state behavior generally is determined by the poles. Okay, so yes, I think, I'm sorry, the 0 is not minus a. So you take Laplace transform here, you're going to get as plus 1. So your 0 will be minus of 1 by a. Yes, the 0 will be minus 1 by a. Yes. Okay, so it's okay. I'm trying to say here that zeros operate on the derivative of the input. If your input is not changing in the steady state, then your zeros will not have any impact in the steady state. When will 0 have an impact? Whenever input is having a sudden transition. If your input is changing suddenly, which normally happens if you apply a step input, your input is going to change suddenly at the origin. Then a 0 will quickly react. It will quickly react and produce a response. Okay? Yes. So if you want to change the transient response. So transient response usually means this is the initial response. Whenever there is a sudden change in the input, okay, zeros will have an impact. In the steady state, zeros will have no impact. Okay. So let me come back to this. We'll finish our discussion on this transfer functions. Okay. So now finally, what we so far discussed is that we know first we should be able to compute a transfer function, which can be easily computed. It will be just a ratio of two polynomials for most linear time invariant systems characterized by linear differential equations. Now, once we know transfer function, we can say if the system is stable or not by just looking at the poles and zeros. For stability, all the poles should be in the left of S plane. So now what? Now we know the system is stable. The next step is to find the frequency response. To find the frequency response, we evaluate the transfer function at S equal to j omega. We just substitute S equals to j omega in the transfer function, then we will get a function which a complex function which will be dependent on omega. Now when we measure frequency response, we said we change the frequency all the way from 0, which is DC frequency, to infinite frequencies. So that's what frequency response is. You will change your frequency from 0 till infinity and then plot this response h of omega. H of omega is already your frequency response. Now you don't need to feed sinusoids to the system and check the response, right? You don't need to do that. Instead, you can directly get the Laplace the transfer function. Once you get the transfer function, just substitute S equal to j omega, you get your frequency response. So this frequency response, I'm going to plot this frequency response h of j omega as a function of omega, where omega is going to vary from 0 to infinity. Here omega is in radians per second. Okay, so omega is 2 pi times f. So where f is in hertz, so 2 pi, when I multiply it by 2 pi, I'm going to get radians per second. I'm going to change omega from 0 to infinity and plot h of omega. Now since h of omega is a complex number, it's going to have magnitude and phase. So it's going to have h of j omega and angle of h of j omega. Since it's a complex number, it will have both magnitude and phase. So a frequency response generally includes both a plot of magnitude and also a plot of the phase response. So both completes the frequency response of a system. Now the next question is, normally when we plot frequency response, we tend to use logarithmic functions. So now very briefly, we'll talk why do we use logarithmic functions? What is the advantage of logarithmic functions in little bit detail, so that it makes sense why do we use logarithmic functions when we plot the transfer functions. What exactly is a transfer function? A transfer function, if you see, can I say it is a ratio of two quantities, y of s by x of s? Okay, a transfer function is essentially like a ratio of two quantities. Now, especially if I'm going to plot them on a graph, the graph should give me this information about this ratio. It's like I'm comparing two quantities. One divided by the other. If both the quantities are equal, what will be the value of this ratio? 1, right? If both of them are equal, if y of s equals x of s, then I should get that ratio to be equal to 1. Now, if y of s happens to be much greater than 1, then I know that the gain of the system is really large. If y of s happens to be much less than 1, then I know that the gain is very small. So small gain, I know by just looking at the value. If it is much less than 1, I know the gain is small. If it is much greater than 1, the gain is large. When it is equal to 1, there is no gain at all. So it's like I'm comparing two values. If the two values are nearly the same, then I'm going to get 1. And if one value is much greater, this ratio is going to be much greater, and otherwise it's going to be much lesser. Can I use some processing wherein this information can be conveyed. This information of being equal to 1, where 1 is at the center of your universe. Your 1 is the center of your universe. And after that, if it is much greater than 1, it should be able to show that. And if it is much less than 1, again, I should be able to do that as well. So that's where logarithmic functions come in handy. So there are many reasons why we have adopted logarithms. Have been used since 1920-30s when amplifier designs have become popular. Amplifier was made popular in 1910s. With that, long distance telephony became a possibility. And after that, in 1920s, 30s, and 40s, we perfected our understanding of these systems. So at that time, logarithms became a much simpler tool for engineers. So there are several advantages which a log scale offers. We'll see all of them one by one. One first obvious reason is what I discussed right now is also one of the reasons. But one obvious reason is whenever you have large variations, your frequency is going all the way from 0 till infinity. Similarly, the amplifier gains can vary all the way from say 10 power 6 or 10 power 7, it can be much higher gains, to all the way to 0. Again, amplifier's gain can also vary significantly. It can have large variations. Whenever you have such large variations, it becomes much difficult to show on a linear scale. So I took an example in the last class. So for example, if you take 3 amplifiers, A3, A2, A1. For example, A3, let's assume, has a gain of 10 power 6. A2, let's assume, has a gain of 100. And let's assume A1 has a gain of 0.01. Now, what is the ratio of A3 to A1? A3 to A2? What is the ratio of A3 to A2 here? 10 power 4. What is the ratio of A2 to A1? That's also 10 power 4, right? A2 to A1 is also 10 power 4. Now, we'll first try to plot this on a linear scale. If I try to plot this on a linear scale, I'm going to show it here. So, if I try to plot this on a linear scale, what will happen is that, so I want to plot 10 power 6, right? So if I want to plot 10 power 6, I'm going to divide them into 10 power 5. So 10 power 6 is actually a million, close to, it's a million. So I need to have 1/10 of a million points marked on the y-axis. So this will be 10 power 5, 2 into 10 power 5, and so on. It will be 10 into 10 power 5 will be here, so which is 10 power 6. Now on this graph, if I want to show 10 power 2, which is 100, where do you think will that come here? This is 10 power 5. This graph again has to be divided into units of 100. So that should be divided into 1000 small units. Because if you divide 10 power 5 by 100, you get 1000, 10 power 3. So I should divide 1000 small units, and 10 square is going to come at this point. Now, if I want to plot 0.01, I have to divide this small region into, again, thousands of units. It will be, sorry, I have to again, it will be 1 by 10,000 of it. So it will be almost invisible here. So I can't distinguish 10 square and 0.01 if I plot it on a linear axis. So this is called as a linear axis, where I'm linearly dividing the axis. If I do this way, I can't distinguish these 2 points. I can't plot all the 3 amplifier gains on the same graph. Okay, but generally we will need to do that. Sometimes if you are cascading amplifiers, we want to find out the amplifier gains at each node. If I'm cascading 3 amplifiers, okay, a set of amplifiers, and I want to plot and see the response at each point, I may not be able to plot them on the same graph. That's where logarithms come in handy. Logarithms have a tendency, whenever you have large variations in functions, you can use logarithms to represent them. So now I have 10 power 6, 10 square, 0.01. Now let's take, I'll tell you later why you need to take, let's take 20 log of gain, mod of AB. This is what we're going to do. If I take 20 log of this, what will be 10 power 6? 20 log of 10 power 6, can I say it's 120 decibels? What will be 10 square? 10 square will be 40 decibels. And what will be 10 power minus 2? Minus 40 decibels. Now if you see here, the gap between these 2 points is 80 decibels. The gap between these two is 80 decibels. And this is exactly what we wanted to convey before. Before we saw that the ratio of the gains, which is A3, this is A3, A2 and A1, A3 upon A2, that's what matters to an engineer. The ratio of these gains is same for both. Okay, but on a linear scale, this information cannot be conveyed, because on a linear scale, we are simply going to do A3 minus A2. So this is not right to do that. So therefore, we need to see how much is the gain higher when in comparison with another amplifier. So that information can be easily conveyed if you take logarithms. Exponential variations become linear variations once we take logarithmic functions, once we apply logarithm to that function. So here if you see, this was 10 power 6, this is 10 squared, this was exponentially changing, significant reduction. But on a log scale, it looks like a linear reduction. So now, if I plot this on a log scale, all I need to do is that I need to divide them into units of 40. Let's say I divided each into minus. So this is minus 40, this is 0, this is plus 40, this is 80, this is 120. Now if you see, the gain of A3 is here, the gain of A2 is here, and the gain of A1 is here. Now I was able to plot all the three gains with significant variation on a single graph. This is the advantage of a logarithmic function. So now you can take it for now that if I want to plot a logarithmic function, if I want to plot gains, generally we take 20 log of mod of voltage gain. So if I'm going to take ratio of voltages, generally logarithms we apply for ratioed quantities. The quantity has to be a ratio of two numbers, two similar quantities. So it will be, generally that's the trend. It will be ratio of two voltages. So V out upon V in for amplifiers. This is for voltages. If you want to take voltages, it should be 20 log. If you take power, it will be 10 log of P out by P in. Because generally, your output power is proportional to square of the voltages. So input power is proportional to square of the input voltage. So the ratio of P out by P in will be equal to V out by V in the whole square. It's proportional to that. So therefore, if I substitute this in the equation, I'm going to get 20 log. So if you are taking ratio of powers, you apply 10 log. If you take a ratio of voltages, you apply 20 log. That's one thing. If you want to plot voltage gain, we take 20 log and plot it. The other reason why engineers went ahead with logarithms is the other fact. Generally, when we design amplifiers, so you should keep in mind, in the past, you had telephone communications that engineers were struggling to enable telephone communication from one end of United States to the other end of the United States. Then after that, they wanted to cross the Atlantic. So they used to have this transatlantic cables. So this is Britain. So maybe my graph is not fine, but you can understand that there is sea in between. So they had to lay underground cables which can take information signals from underground, through water. It has to be a really long distance, and it has to be traveled from one end to the other end through water. So since the signal has to travel such long distances, any signal, so for example, if I'm shouting, just look at the voice signal. If I'm shouting, as you move away from me, you will stop hearing my voice. You will in fact start hearing weaker and weaker versions of my voice, right? My voice signal will slowly start attenuating. So the farther you move away, in the same way, electrical signals will also become much, much weaker as you keep moving away from the source. So generally what we do is that, so they had to actually break these wires in between and insert amplifiers. So an amplifier will locally boost the signal. Okay, this is like, imagine I've inserted loudspeakers in between. So you are starting from here. Previously there was no, I was talking here, and as you move away from me, you will no longer hear my voice. But imagine I'm going to add amplifiers in between. So amplifiers in between, so at every point you will be able to hear the voice very well. So that's the idea. So the engineers had to add amplifiers all the way entirely through this transatlantic cable. Okay. So first they had, when vacuum tubes are popular, they were using vacuum tube amplifiers. Later they were replaced with, semiconductor amplifiers. So this is very clear that we need a cascade of amplifiers. We need amplifiers will generally be cascaded together. So when amplifiers are cascaded, if you want to find what is the overall gain of the amplifier, the whole gain of the amplifier, that will be simply the product of all the gains. The product of all the voltage gains gives me the overall amplifier gain of this amplifier. If you go for logarithms, on the other hand, if let's say I'm expressing the gains using logarithms, on the other hand, if I take 20 log of all of this, you just have to add the voltage gains. That's it. If you're asked to find what is the overall voltage gain of this entire system chain of amplifiers, you just have to add 20 log of A1 plus 20 log of A2 plus 20 log of AN, assuming there are n amplifiers in this chain. So multiplication operations become addition operations in logarithms. That's another advantage why engineers preferred going for logarithms, because cascaded amplifiers is something that was very commonly encountered. And to calculate the overall gain of a chain, logarithms came in very handy because additions were obviously much simpler than multiplications. So multiplications become additions, divisions become subtractions. So when you go for logarithms, and that's very easy to handle. Okay, so that's the whole idea. And just I'll finish one point. I'll discuss how to plot frequency response in the next class. To finally finish the lecture, I'll just discuss just one more point about logarithmic functions, and I think we'll be done with the lecture. So I just wanted to show you, if you take the function log of x, the function x here, what should be the range of x that you can apply to the system? I mean, I should probably use the word domain, but what are the range of values that x can take? Can x be negative? No, right? X should be always greater than 0. X should be always greater than 0. So now we will see how a logarithmic function treats or converts the real axis. What I'm going to do is I'm going to feed, I'll see what happens to log of x. X is a real number, a positive real number, where x is going to go from 0 till infinity. Now I'm going to take log to the base a. Okay, log x to the base a. Now let's look at this number. How is the real axis itself? If you look at the real axis, you have 0, 1 till infinity. Now let's say I'm starting from 1 and I'm trying to move towards infinity. Starting from 1, I'm trying to move all the way till infinity. Now what I'm going to do is that, because infinity is much longer on linear scale, when you look at it, it's really a much larger axis. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go exponentially. So let's assume, let me take log to the base 10. I'm going to go from 1, 10, 100, then I'm going to go to 10 cube and so on. Now remember, for every 10, I can find a corresponding value which is equal to 1 by 10 here. So there is a 1-to-1 mapping. If I start from 1 and I start advancing towards infinity, I can find a corresponding, I'm going to jump from 1, 10, 10 square, 10 cube and so on. In the same way, if I'm going to start from 1 and going to move in this direction, I will hop from 1 by 10, 1 by 100 and so on. Now if you look at it, of course it's going to take a much longer time for me to reach infinity. What I'm trying to tell you is that you will take the same time to reach 0 if you start from 1 and if you hop this way. So it's as difficult to reach the infinitesimal as it is to reach the infinity. And logarithmic functions clearly capture that. Okay, logarithmic functions clearly capture the difficulty, I mean, it says that if you, 1 is the center of the universe for a logarithmic function. So if you apply log x, if I try to plot the logarithmic function, what will be log of 1? Any base. It doesn't matter whatever base you take. X equal to 1, log of 1 is always 0. Log of 1 is always 0. Okay. Now let's assume I'm going to take log to the base 10 of x. Log to the base 10 of x. So 10 will, what will be the value of 10? If x is 10, what will be log to the base 10 of x? That will be 1. If x is 10 square, it's going to be 2, and so on. Similarly, if x is 0.1, it's going to be minus 1. If x is 0.01, it's going to be minus 2. So what is it doing here? The logarithmic function is that it is expanding this region. It is expanding 0 to 1, and it is somehow kind of compressing 1 to infinity. It is compressing 1 to infinity and expanding 0 to 1, such that after this process, after you apply a logarithmic function, 0 to 1 will look the same as 1 to infinity. Okay, 0 to 1 will look the same as 1 to infinity. So that's what, if you plot a logarithmic function, I can show that if you plot the logarithmic function, what will be log of 0? What will be log of 0? So can you say from this, what will be log 0? See, log is becoming negative and negative as you approach 0. Okay, so as you approach 0, it will be minus infinity. So your log 0 will be minus infinity. Log 1 is 0, so this is 1. So logarithmic function will look like this. And from 1 to infinity, of course, it's going to go to infinity as well, but its progression will be much smaller. Okay, so from 0 to 1, if you see, it has expanded this region, and from 1 to infinity, it has compressed this variation so that, or I can simply say, yeah, it has compressed this region in such a way so that these two will be equally spaced. It has expanded 0 to 1 and compressed 1 to infinity so that after you apply the logarithmic function, they both will look the same. So that's what logarithmic functions does. So I can assume the same way I was taking 1 by 10 and all that to explain it. If I take log to any base, let's assume a to x, if I'm going to take this as my logarithmic function, I can always find a point. Let's say I have a point a which is greater than 1. I can find a corresponding point 1 by a which is between 0 and 1. Same way, if I have a square, I can find 1 by a square between 0 and 1. Okay, so there will be a 1-to-1 mapping between. So this is how you get that 1-to-1 mapping between 0 to 1 and 1 to infinity, and logarithmic function does that. So if you look at this graph itself, you can say it is expanding. In this region, y of x is behaving like an expanding function. The small region, it is mapping to, it is expanding it and mapping it all the way from, this is mapped to 0, and minus 0, it is mapping to minus infinity. And now here it's compressing. It's, even though your x is changing significantly, it is compressing it to the same range as 0 to 1. Okay, so this is what logarithms is, and it perfectly captures what happens in amplifiers. Your 1 now becomes the center of the logarithmic universe. 1 becomes 0 in a logarithmic function. If you take log of 1, will be 0. So that's exactly what we need in amplifier. So this is the point where I can say if the gain is 1, there is no amplification. If the gain is greater than 1, there is amplification. The gain is less than 1, there is attenuation. So that's why logarithmic functions clearly capture attenuation and amplification, and no amplification as well. So that if there is no amplification, it's going to give me 0. The log function is going to give me 0. Okay, so that's why we'll apply logarithmic functions. So the next class I'll discuss how to plot, given a transfer function, how to plot a logarithmic plot on a frequency axis. So those plots are called Bode plots. They're simplified versions which engineers can draw it by their hands. Okay, and it helps greatly in analyzing circuits intuitively. So I'll stop at this point.